Well, hello there, and welcome to our podcast, Is This Art? I'm Catherine, and I'm joined here by Jed, and we are members of the Video Garage team. Jed, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, can't complain. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about post-production, right?
Yes, indeed. I can't wait to dive right in.
Oh yeah, but before we dive right in, we have a new promotion going on here at the Video Garage.
Promotion,
Really gotta
collaboration.
emphasize it. So 23 and 23, where we are offering a 23% discount off of all of our projects that you book with us between now and March 31st. So whether you're looking to start a podcast, you have training videos that you need to produce, a brand overview video, an e-course, whatever it may be, you can book a discovery call with us and we can start talking about how we may be able to help you with your video production needs.
And your post-production needs.
And your post-production needs. And so today we're going to be talking about what some of those needs might be. A little bit about kind of what our process is, right? And some steps that are required. So I want to set the scene, right? We just say we're on a production day. We just wrapped. Everyone's loading the gear out.
Yeah.
Jed, what happens next?
Oh, so much. I was actually going to ask you that, but I guess I'd start with from just a standpoint of like just a practical baseline, like of that once the footage is shot, the idea would be that the footage that you shot was shot with post-production in mind, that you got the footage you wanted that was intentional and mindful and planned out. But the process is the steps are pretty simple. The acting out of those steps is a little bit more complicated. So once we're done shooting, we would then take the footage and back it up and process it. We would then, in terms of from a bird's eye view, there is a process by which we share the footage. We have the stakeholders, the client, take a look at the footage and pick selects. Like those are pieces of the footage that they like the best. We turn that into a string out, which allows them to kind of see that footage kind of played out in a timeline on a video player.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there we have some phases of production where we have a rough cut or assembly edit, a fine cut, and then a final cut. And in that process we also have time for determining music, sound design, creating motion graphics, what motion graphics we need, how do they play together. And then of course color correction, which is just making sure that the footage matches and then it creates the tone and the vibe we're looking for. But the end of the process starts at the beginning, which is pre-production, where you create a plan with the end goal in mind of your video, of the specific things that you need to tell your story or to have your vision come to life, and then also make sure that you have a clear idea of what the intent of the video is. So from a tactical standpoint, there is a process of you've processed the footage, you review the footage through a few iterations. The editing team creates edits based on that feedback. But again, the idea is to make sure that you did your work in pre-production, the creative phase, so that you know what video you want ultimately as a deliverable.
Yeah, and I have our creative director, Andrea's voice in my head right now. After we finish filming, she'll often say like, she starts to have that edit in mind in her head already with certain sound bites or maybe B-roll that we filmed. And you can almost do like this like initial assembly edit in your head.
Right.
Of like, we're going to use that. We're going to use that.
Yeah, and so that's interesting because like I think that it does illustrate the point, which is that you want to have very specific plans and very specific approaches to get what you need for the footage.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's doing interviews or whether that's a narrative structure where there's like a story being told with actors, or there's an animation or whatever it may be, you want to know what you need to capture to tell your story. However, as you've noted, that as a vision comes from the abstract into reality, there can be changes, people's perspectives or different stakeholders, or you captured something on set that you weren't expecting that was even better what you had in mind, or something that you thought was going to work didn't work. You have to plan for that and to have the ability to still get what you're looking for, still achieve the goals, and still be able to deliver on time. So yeah, I would say that I can't speak for Andrew, but I would guess that when it's it's not so much that she's like already editing in her head after it's shot. It's that she has a plan in mind for what she wants to shoot, and she executes it. And then once it's done, there's a certain excitement of like, oh my gosh, like this vision I had in our head, our collective heads, is now coming to life, and we have the material that we need to create this thing in reality that was a month ago, a week ago, 2 days ago, whatever it was just an idea.
Just like a list of questions and a list of call times, and now it's something that you can actually look at and kind of share with people.
Exactly. And I also think that there's a if you were to give 10 editors with a team of collaborators or a team of stakeholders, and 10 directors the same footage, and to edit them in with the same directions, or the same criteria, the videos would all look different because there's a unique quality to each kind of artistic vision, no matter how clear you are about what you're looking for. So that's why it's important. Again, we talk about this a lot, is that the more communication you have in advance, the clearer you are, not just in general, but specific, like we're talking about the same thing. Then while you might be editing, once you get the footage done, my hope is, and the best case scenario is that you've made a plan to capture certain footage that you want. You get that footage and you execute on that plan, while allowing for surprises to happen, or happy accidents, as Bob Ross might say.
So I have one question for you, which is for anyone of our listeners who potentially has never really been a part of the post-production process at all or is new to it. What are some things that clients should bring to the table, or some best practices that maybe they could keep in mind?
So, to answer your question, I think that to start, you want to make sure that you have some examples of videos that look the way that you envision you want your video to look. That plays into the pre-production process, of course, but it's a nice to have reference videos so that you can make sure you're speaking the same language of not only what you want, but why that what you want may work or might not work, depending on the team's like, oh well, like I see what you're going for. You want it to be this way or that way. But what if we tried it this way, right? But in order to have that kind of back and forth, you need to have an understanding of what it is you're trying to go for. So I'd say one is to go in with specific examples of what you like. It could even be just like pictures, like still images of things. Like I wanted to have this energy, or
like this kind of color design or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah, color
Just
correction. Yeah.
the most amount of data you can, examples of what you're looking for, the better. I would also say that kind of understanding that it is a process, and that
Takes time.
it takes time. Exactly. And it takes care, and it takes the thing I will say is that, like, it's not always the case, but very often when we work with folks, it's not the only thing on their plate, right? So it's not a question of time, it's a question of like, you have to plan for the of wrangling the different stakeholders to have them be able to review the different iterations in a time, in a space where they can be focused on it.
And then to pull together all of that feedback and kind of share it with us. Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think a lot of folks that we deal with, I don't say a lot, but I think I say a fair amount. Sometimes it's that they don't know exactly, like they have an idea of what they want, but they aren't exactly sure how to explain it, right? Like how to explain what they're looking for. So I think it's the more that you can in advance think about how you want to talk about, even if you don't have the technical know-how to explain exactly what you're looking for, the more that you are comfortable explaining your vision however you can, the better. And then the last piece I would say is, or at least for this section, is to understand that it is kind of like, ironing a shirt, right? Like there's actually a famous screenwriter talks about how writing is, you start here and then you go back over the thing you came before, and then you go a little bit further and you go a little higher up and a little bit further, and you just kind of iron out all the pieces. And at the end of the day, it's easy to say, oh, what's a process? Well, exactly. What does that process mean? And then what that means is that you want to be clear about what you're trying to capture in advance. You want to bear in mind what the end deliverable is, and you want to understand that that it's not as linear and as kind of I don't know, like there's sections to it that's very linear, But even through that, there is a process by which you're going to iron out details. You're going to like kind of, finesse certain things, and you're going to, you know what I mean? Like, you know what
Yeah,
I'm
and
saying?
actually, I have a very clear vision in my head of actually sometimes when we will be like editing internally, we'll be reviewing it. Um, I'm thinking of like when you snap. Like, so
Oh,
we'll have an editor
yeah.
that will be pulling it together and just kind of doing an initial pass, and it's communicating. We're going from one cut to another. And post production, a big element of it is pacing. Oftentimes, like if you see an edit, or not oftentimes. Sometimes when you see an edit, you'll look at it and you're like, I don't really know what it is, but something feels a little off. And what it really comes down to is kind of this pacing. So what I have seen do either if I'm editing a video for myself or I have seen you do or working with our editors here in house is kind of like
Yeah.
you do you want to explain it? You
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
snap on the
Yeah.
beat of like this is the pacing, this is the breath
Yeah.
of the video.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think it starts from, and again, this is not necessarily the best practice. This is just what I like to do.
Hmm.
But I think if I find the music that feels right, then it's a matter of, um, that sets the tone for the vibe, the message. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but basically, it's the thing that drives everything for me. Because once you have that, then again, it's like, all right, so this is where this goes. This is where this goes. And the reason why I'm snapping is not because I'm being snappy. It's because it just makes sense. Like it's where it needs to be based on like there's a guideline that exists, which is like this is the beat, this is the reason for that. And that's another thing I'll say is that when we talk about a lot of the editing, there's a lot of kind of like we do a sizzle video, which is basically a montage or a series of shots. uh, in essence, you could just do a series of shots and you have a montage or a sizzle video.
Hmm.
But what I really try to do is you got to pick, well, not only you need to know why you're using that piece of footage, what does it convey, and does it convey that thing as best as it can. And so,
Hmm.
like, if you're doing like an event video forever, like a lot of it's really simple. Like, you want to show smiling faces, but really what does better is if you show somebody reacting to what something said and having them smile at it, because that makes you feel like there's a connection. Other just random people smiling, who knows what they're smiling at? Like
Hmm.
you're not in on the joke, you're not in on
Hmm.
the joy. So I think it's about like finding moments that resonate with the message you're trying to send, but also that like works in alignment with the pacing of the music, which is again, it's just as good a guideline as any. So that's not necessarily best practice. It's just the thing that I like. But however you do it, it's not a series of shots for the sake of series of shots. It's a series of shots that are designed to create a tone, a vibe, to explain what you're trying to explain intentionally. So, again, whether it's acting or whether it's B-roll, which is kind of action shots of things happening live, almost like a documentary, or if it's like you know practice lines for like a presentation or just a conversation like this, the not the watchword, but the guiding light, the North Star is, does it there's a couple of them, I guess, but it's like, is it can you find those serendipitous authentic moments where somebody is either reacting, speaking, sounding, or being
Hmm.
uh, in a way that shows human emotion about the thing that you're trying to present.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many different aspects of post-production, and am looking forward to our future episodes where we're going to be able to kind of dive into each of them, whether it be music or pacing or animation, like
Or dance
or
where you,
dance. Because I was making a reference
yeah,
of going down a list. It kind of looks like a dance move. Maybe
yeah,
I'll bring it into my
yeah,
dance classes. But I really want to take this energy and bring it into our next segment where we go into this wide focus, and then through talking, hopefully we pull things back in where we talk about some bigger questions. And so how I want to position it kind of today and talking with you about post production is you were talking about pacing, and in my head I'm thinking about trends and the evolution of styles in post production, and how we can kind of see that move through history. And there was a period of time, I still honestly now, but definitely like height of like Marvel Cinematic Universe, where every trailer that was showed out had like this strong beat music where everything was cut on the beat, and it was it was great. And got like the audience hyped and was like so ready for this movie to drop. But that's a version of, it was a stylistic choice that was made in post production, to try and get people excited. And so I guess I would love to just like keep chatting about some style, like different styles that you like, or because you were talking about your process of finding music first, and
Sure.
then
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to throw a couple things out there, I guess.
yeah.
So I've found it interesting that like, if you talk about YouTube, there was a period of time where the YouTube videos would be edited like without regard for kind of how reality is. Like we started, they suddenly start talking and then they cut to another angle just because they didn't want to show whatever the person says. But it doesn't lend itself to like, it's jarring if you're not used to it. Like it's not the classic way of editing. But what's interesting is that because that became like just a practical way of getting your message across, it became an aesthetic that was then used to an effect. So that was an example of somebody kind of doing something not necessarily with the art in mind, but just sort of the practicality in mind, that became a style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, there's a similar kind of correlation is that Martin Scorsese's regular art editor, what she'll do is she edits on the performance, not so much on the continuity.
I didn't know
Yeah,
this.
so if you
Okay.
and you can't, it's interesting. You can't always see it. It's not always the case, but or at least you can't always tell. But there are times when you're like, if you know that's a thing, then
Mm-hmm.
you watch the scenes, you're like, whoa, like that person like kind of time jumped when they got up. But because the performance, the energy, and the vibe was there, then it doesn't feel the way that it is. And I would say that like from our perspective, from the things that we do here at the Video Garage, like there is a certain we talked about creativity in the last episode, but like there's a certain amount of creativity, but from our perspective, like what we're not trying to do is like we're very mindful to make sure that we compose shots well. That's the first step. Like you can't edit something if the footage wasn't shot well. So we make sure you compose shot well in the
And that sound is really good.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But and I guess once you have solid footage to work with that has again has good composition, has good variety of light, contrast, things like that, then it becomes a lot easier to edit. And the last thing I'll say, or just the thing that to answer your question, is that from my perspective, the the style that I think works best for how do I put it? Different projects need uh, different style, as it were, but the tenets are still there, which it should be. Um, you know, it shouldn't take you out of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It should heighten the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and it should not. It should not. It should be mindful. It should not be because you saw a Marvel trailer and you want to copy it. Which you can copy it for any number of reasons. You just have to have a good reason for it. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's best for the story.
Mhm.
And so that's the biggest question is are you telling the story as clearly and as effectively and as on brand or as on point story wise as possible? Because what happens often, honestly, like what happens is people just copy what they see and thinking it's cool. But it's like, there's nothing wrong with wearing a suit or wearing a t-shirt or wearing, a poncho. But if you're wearing it in different environments for different reasons, it's not necessarily going to get you the response you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think that as you're pulling together your video, it's very possible that you do an initial edit, a rough cut of it with maybe it's more upbeat. It has maybe large variety of cuts going to B-roll, going back, very dynamic, lots of movement. And it could be that it's too much and you review it and you're like, oh, maybe we need to like sit in this moment. And you can actually use that as a strategy of being like, okay, we're gonna get people all excited and then we have a key point that we really want to drive home on. We're gonna slow it down for that and really draw the audience in, to listen.
Yeah, and well, I guess I would say that like you should ask yourself, well, why did you want to do it that way in the first place? Like, because you wouldn't do that for like a like a piano performance, like a nice classical piano performance. And you probably wouldn't do it for like a presentation that's like honoring somebody who's passed away or something, right? Like
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
the point of the story is that like you really need to look at what story are we trying to tell?
Yep.
What message are we trying to tell? What's the best way to communicate that message? And you need to have an understanding of like obviously it's like we're going to talk about this later, I think. But like, if you have an angle on a camera where the camera's pointing down, then the person who you're looking at, just by virtue of the kind of how we see things, like if you have a camera pointing down on someone, they're going to look less powerful. If you have a camera looking up at someone, they're going to look more powerful. Or if they do the right lighting, they look scary. But the point is, you have to utilize those kind of techniques to express the thing you're trying to express. And so, in order to sort of innate of that is you need to know what you're trying to express in the first place. And I that's what I'm trying to say is that I think a lot of times people say is like, all right, I want this video to give me the feeling that I get when I see this other thing.
Or
But
when I experience
right,
this, it doesn't have
yeah,
to just be
right,
media.
right, and so exactly right,
It can be a life experience that you're
right,
going from.
and
Like, what is it like to ride a roller coaster? Portray that in
right,
film.
right, and so, but there's this in that there's this expectation that somehow the surface thing, the surface presentation, gives you that feeling, and it's not always the case. Like, there's a fine line between um, editing something fast paced that makes you feel like you're on a roller coaster, then also makes you feel uncomfortable and like, what is going on right here? So like, it's
Ooh, no, sorry.
no, go,
I'm
go,
thinking
go
about
ahead.
like, I'm thinking about some films that I've seen that use editing as a form to like make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like that is a thing, and it's a strategy, like you were saying. And I'm trying to think of an example. Do you have one like off the top of your head?
Oh,
I didn't think of one beforehand, but
there's a lot. I mean, so Hitchcock was really good at that.
yeah.
It's editing. He uses like images, like actually along with the music, like I was talking about. There's one out right now, recently. It's a horror movie that I'm not a huge horror fan, but I've seen on Twitter. It's kind of this ending moment of, and this person who is uh, kind of creepy. And so there's this woman who just the director just held the camera on her with this like odd look on her face for like extended period of time. And that's not necessarily editing. That's like the lack of editing, but like that's kind of the point is you say to yourself, all right, if I want to um, make somebody, if I want to like creep the audience out, there's almost nothing more creepy than just having a camera right here. And it's also similar with like Donnie Darko, which again isn't really editing, but what the director did is kind of always framed him right in the middle of right here. So like right now we're kind of have these angles that are kind of off center, which makes it like
Conversational.
less conversation. It makes
Yeah.
more conversational, less aggressive.
Not confrontational.
Confrontational, exactly.
So not as confrontational.
Right. So, and I guess I'm hesitating because I can't think of any ones. There's a lot of examples of, I mean, oh,
Ooh,
no,
I was actually going to go on a slightly different route. So
go ahead.
feel
No, no, go ahead.
Well, because one thing you were also talking about too is this like expectation, like you're building this expectation and then how does it actually play out. I have like the trailer from Hans Zimmer's Masterclass in my head. He's like, okay, so here's how we propose it. Is it going to be like resolved in a happy way or in a sad way or in the way you expected or in a way that's totally different?
So for Hans Zimmer is a
iconic composer for film scores. It does Interstellar and the Cornfield Chase is probably like definitely the top of pretty much every score playlist I pull together. But I kind of have, he goes, oh, that was a question, bit of a dodgy question. Like he kind of goes through this narrative that's used in storytelling, also can be seen in post-production. But I'm thinking of this, it builds. You're waiting perhaps for this like big moment, and then how you edit that, whether it's holding on a frame longer than what you might expect, because we consume so much content that we have a pretty good understanding of what would be quote unquote traditional, or we know, like if we watch a talk show, morning talk show, we know the angles, we know kind of how it would be directed, we know how it would be edited.
the visual language.
Yeah, that visual language we have an understanding of. And then so it's kind of, it opens up this question of, okay, what happens when you diverge from that? In the case when you were having, okay, we're just going to stay on this frame of this person and really make the audience sit in it.
Yeah, and so you've got a good point, which is kind of brings it to back around, is that there is some, what's the word? There's some classic film language that we're all used to, or that we're still all used to, but that there's a bunch of other new languages that are coming up either through YouTube, through years and years and years of people trying different things and people copying or trying, to emulate them, and then also TikTok and stuff like that. But I guess the point is, to your point, is that you start with this expectation And then once you have that mastery of that expectation, you can then adjust, you can play with that expectation to create things that you didn't expect, which creates an environment. And truth be told, like there's plenty of examples, especially like in the videos that we do, like you don't necessarily want to like surprise them. We're not, you're not trying to be M. Night Shyamalan, but I guess the broader point is again to be very clear about what end goal you're going for. Like what's the feeling, what's the tone, what's the
what emotion do you want to evoke?
What emotion you want to, and like, yeah. And so like, again, if you have, if you're trying to make, you're interviewing a bunch of people and you have the camera looking down on them, or they're not going to look so powerful, right? Like, and again, that's not really editing, but I guess the point is that regardless of what, it's not just editing, because we're talking about post-production, but post-production should be the logical conclusion to all the planning and execution you did already.
Oh, I like that a lot. So, I'm thinking about everything that we covered, and I mean, post-production is a huge process. We could dive into any element of it and have 5 episodes each, whether it's transitions or editing style or pacing or different platforms, maybe stylistic, like YouTube from 2008 versus TikTok creators now versus major films back kind of in the 50s or 60s. I mean, there's so much to cover. I don't think we can quite like pull it back into focus yet. I think we have to leave it a little bit more broad for future discussions.
Well, so I think that what I like about this section of the podcast is that it does kind of, well, first of all, this one in particular revealed how kind of broad this conversation is and how we can turn it into a bunch of other conversations. But to me, what I liked about it was that I really look at it like, well, we start off with this jumping off point. And, as we take this journey, we may end up, 100 miles away, 1,000 miles away in Missouri. We might end up back where we started. But the idea is we want to take this jumping off point and see where it takes us.
Yeah, I like that. And so we may come into this segment with an idea of what we're going to talk about, but let it just kind of gravitate wherever it may be while we're chatting. So I like this segment too, and I'm looking forward to all the future ones as well.
Me too. I can't wait for it.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for chatting today, Jed.
Thank you.